This conference will now be recorded.
Dr. Leanne Llewellyn. Here. Mr. Dylan Furness. Dr. Aubrey Hirschhorn. Mr. Dan Fitzpatrick. Dr. Ryan Moyer. Dr. Stacy Day. Here. Mr. Ben Alashewski. Here. Mr. Bob O'Connor. Mr. Rajesh Freeman.
Here.
Mr. Chris Cooley.
Here.
Mr. David Holtzberg.
Here.
Mr. Scott Brown.
Here.
Mr. Sean Sullivan.
Yep.
Mr. Brandon Miller. Ms. Juanita Bernal Leon. Here. Ms. Sarah Kessler. Here. Ms. Viviana Bendixson. Here. Scott.
Here.
Ms. Felicia Burks.
Present.
Present on
Virtual. Present.
Any changes, which I do. Minutes from the November 4th Management Board meeting. Are there any changes or updates that needed to be given us there? If no, is there a motion to accept? Okay. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes from November 2nd, 4th, 2022 Management Board meeting? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Are there any citizens here today that wish to speak? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to our action items. First up is the annual program-wide audit report. Davis.
Steve. Intro, the brief word last year, the new auditor, with the we said it was a speech where folks present on budget. We just said, but
All right, well, thank you everyone for having us today. I'm Julie Davis. I'm a shareholder with Rivera Gordimer and Company. With me today is Elise Leach, a supervisor in our office as well. We just want to thank you all for allowing us to be here today. Thank you all for engaging us to be your new independent audit firm. And also I just want to thank the staff, thank Ed, Sue, Justin at Carr, Riggs and Ingram, and the rest of the entire team that helped us get through the audit process. It takes a lot of hard work, a lot of information gathering to be able to put the audit together, and I just want to thank the entire team for their help in that. As Ed mentioned, it is our first year as your independent auditor. We provided a quote to the organization back in August, and then throughout the fall, we worked with the team at Cherry Bekaert on doing the transition work, and then we started our field work and doing the bulk of the audit in December and January. We're pleased to be here today to issue our audit report. And so with that, I'm going to go over our presentation. So I'm going to go to page 2, which is actually page 1 there. You can skip past the table of contents. There we go. So on this is our audit results. This is what we're here to report to you all today. And we're pleased to report that we're prepared to issue an unmodified opinion on your financial statements, which means that it's a clean opinion. Your financial statements are free of material misstatements, and that any informed user, such as grantors, can rely on your financial statements to make informed decisions. We received full cooperation from the entire team. We had full access to the books and records, and we had no disagreements throughout the audit process. Our responsibilities are under generally accepted auditing standards. which means that our responsibility is to express opinion that the financial statements are free from material misstatement. What that means, we also provide reasonable assurance, not absolute assurance. And what that means is that we use a lot of sampling, we use risk-based audit approach, and we don't look at every transaction that runs through the books and records throughout the year. We also performed our audit in accordance with government auditing standards, which means we do look at compliance with laws, rules, regulations, contracts, grants, and issue a report on consideration of internal controls over financial reporting. We're pleased to report that that report is a clean opinion as well. And then based on your funding sources, we do have additional services that we do as well. It's called a uniform guidance or a single audit, which is where we come in and we test compliance with specific grant terms that you all receive from the federal government. Our major program that we tested this year is the National Estuary Program, which is about $560,000, which is your largest funding source from the federal government in that program. And we're pleased to report that we had a clean opinion on that as well in regards with compliance. On the next page, it's just some more of our audit results. As part of our audit, we do look at internal controls. We test controls surrounding fixed assets, payroll, receipts process, grant invoicing, as well as internal controls surrounding compliance. Please report that we had no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies noted. We do issue a handful of other reports that are required in accordance with government auditing standards. Those are your report on internal controls, compliance, schedule expenditures of federal awards, and so forth down the list. And so if you look in your financial statements, you'll see a myriad of reports, and we're pleased to report that they're all clean, which is always the best part. So moving on to page 4, part of our required communication and our professional standards is to go over with you all management judgment and accounting estimates. These are inherent in every financial statement that management prepares. The significant estimates we identified this year is the allowance for doubtful accounts, the actuarial assumptions that go into the pension standard, which comes from FRS, as well as some fair values. And we concluded that all the estimates were reasonable in the circumstances. And on page 5, this is all the other things that we're required to communicate to you all. I always say that if we had anything significant to report on this page, you would have already been hearing from us. So I'm pleased to report that there's no illegal acts noted, no fraud noted during our audit process, no significant audit findings, no uncorrected misstatements, and no consultation or opinion shopping with other audit firms. You will see there is a couple items we are required to report. There was a change in accounting policy this year. There's a new standard that went into effect for the organization. It's called GASB 87 for leases. The impact on your financial statement really didn't have a prior impact. It was only on the current year and going forward, mainly because your lease actually renewed during the fiscal year. And so there was no material numbers to go back and restate prior period for that. But with that, there was a prior period restatement that management presented, and that was to clean up some old liabilities. Several years ago, I think it was back in 17, there were some software conversions that happened, and there's some old liabilities that were booked that never got cleared out. So we worked with the team, we reviewed these, and we agreed with the prior period restatement to remove these old liabilities. And so our opinion is not modified with that in respect to that matter. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elise, who's going to talk about some of the highlights of the financial statements for you all.
There we go. Thank you, Julie. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Elise Leach, and I'm an audit supervisor with Rivera Gordimer, and I'm going to briefly go over the financial statements. So first off, starting with the statement of net position, looking at total assets, you'll see that unrestricted cash and investments increased over prior year. This is mainly due to the collection of receivables before year end and current year net income. You'll also see that right of use asset, which is related to GASB 87 implementation that Julie mentioned. Moving down to liabilities, you'll see that the major changes are due to the lease liability associated with the building and then the change in the net pension liability, that fluctuates every year based on the actual actuarial plan assumptions. And then we'll just go to the next page. There we go. So looking at the statement of activities, you'll just see that revenues decreased slightly over prior year. This is due to contracts from 2019 and 2020 ending, but this was actually offset by an increase in the funding from the National Estuary Program. And then you'll also see for expenses, these mainly decreased over prior year, and this is due to a decrease in expenses relating to Piney Point, which brings us to an increase in net position of $259,000. Does anybody have any questions about the financials? I know we went over them very high level.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't have a question about that. Maybe you have to about your procedure, and since you do have a scientist, we talk about sampling.
Yes.
Sorry.
So we don't do it based on a percentage. So when we do our sampling, it's a statistical model that we follow that's actually published for our auditing standards. And so it goes into our sample is slightly modified based on the number of transactions for that transaction cycle, as well as we look at the risk associated with that transaction cycle. So sometimes it could be individually significant from a dollar threshold. Sometimes it's a random population depending on the risk level where we just take a random sample regardless of dollar numbers. So it varies throughout the audit process. Absolutely. I don't mind nerding out. It's okay. Well, with that, that's our presentation for you all in regards to the audited financial statements. If you have any questions or anything comes up between now and the final approval, which I believe is next week, which we'll be back for, feel free to reach out to us. We'll be happy to hop on a phone call or answer any questions for you all.
Fiscal year 22 annual program live fund report and financial statement. Jim? Motion and a second, any discussion? The action recommended, aye. Opposed? Motion passes.
I just want to thank you. Their team for facilitating some of this year. My team set inspection firm. This for helping out. Just in my view, the CRI or service provider. So, very smooth up. Glad to present it to you all.
Financial report, next.
Page 10 of your packet is our activity for the period of October 1 through December 31st. There's a couple of items that we put in where we're at revenue expenditures in terms of the expected 25% level. We're a little bit behind the revenue expenditures, and it's mainly related to some order projects that we're expecting within figures. So, recognize some of the expenses later in this fiscal year. We do have a new federal revenues we're brought out during the first quarter. Bring down some federal funds. We did that about mid-January, so we can funds just reflect that we did receive some federal funds since it was this year. Other revenue things to note is that now we're received additional contribution and donations to above and beyond what we initially budgeted, which is great news. We're really pleased to get that. And usually direct those funds towards either a Bay Mini grant or Bay Environment. In total, our revenues for the first quarter were $407,000. Pretty close to the expenses we experienced for $402,000. A couple of footnotes on the expense side, mainly for printing and postage charges. That relates to a second or state of the day reports and then mail out to each of our local or state delegation those reports for this first quarter of fiscal year. We didn't necessarily budget that into the initial budget developed back in August, basically a lead over last fiscal year. So when we present a mid-year budget amendment to y'all at the May meeting, make those adjustments for that with but just for this fiscal year. Same could be said for auditing services. That you heard that our presentations to the board are auditing on planned auditing services costs for fiscal year 2022. Actually, we're moving more than we initially budgeted in August, so we'll bring that to the mid-year budget. But overall, all the other expenses were fairly close to that 25% level we're supposed to be or below for this year. look forward to any questions that you might have.
Recommend that the policy board accept the quarterly financial report. Do we have a motion? Sarah, second. Motion and second. Any further discussion on this item? All those in favor of the action recommended, say aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Draft fiscal year 24 US EPA work plan item, Ed.
This agenda item starts on page 11, and basically includes and links to the full annual EPA draft work plan that we developed for our staff. This serves as our application to EPA for National Electric Program. This year, we actually saw an increase in federal loans to our National Electric Program, to the tune of $850,000. Those dollars were matched with the outlined in an interlocal agreement between the partners of the X-ray program. And any shortfall that may be matched with made up with the project that we have received provide documentation that it's for in the fiscal year where this work. In this case, any partners that have a project can be activity by CCMP between October 1 between work. We'd love to include in our work plan EPA and project. This year, we're looking for about $204,245 in expenditure for that project. And during some of my briefings, there's already been expressed by some of the different projects. So we bring this work plan as a draft to, at this February board meeting. So there's still time to make some adjustments and finalize it before meeting. So we'll be working with you all to include it. Also wanted to mention that if you open up and go into the work plan, there's basically two tables that relate to fiscal year 2024 activities. Table in section 2C4 basically outlines the different funding sources that would go into this annual work plan. The federal dollars as well as the local contributions that we receive from the interlocal agreement. And it also highlights the kind project that we get $850,000 match. So in total, this work plan will be $1.7 million. And that will be used to make up the core of our operating expenses. And that outlined in section 2C5, which is page 55 on the screen. So the top section basically outlines our core operating costs as it relates to paying salary for individuals, keeping the office up and running, as well as our administrative services that we contract out, legal services, auditing, payroll services. That makes up the core of operating expenses in the given fiscal year. We normally also match offset salary and fringe costs with additional grant revenues that we have as a program. In this fiscal year, we're estimating about $330,000 salary and fringe being offset in total for our total program-wide operations for fiscal year 2020. Pause there. Anybody have any questions on that before I move into the review projects we're proposing? So also in section 2C5 at the bottom half of the page on the new contracted technical projects as well as community outreach and education projects that we are proposing to fund through these line resources we have through this work plan agreement. In total, that equates to about $560,000 in projects that we're able to support through these work plan funds. And they're outlined in that TC5, but there are also a handout at each of your places of a table that is basically with 6 technical and 5. Those projects are some ongoing work that we continue to fund each year. So the benefits of hydrologic monitoring, we contribute to EPC and Pinellas County in terms of benefit flow monitor respectively each work plan year. That's going to be consistent for this sort of thing. 2 larger technical projects that we're contemplating further implementation of the habitat master plan. So looking at opportunities to support key habitats. This year, that 104,000, we're in discussions with Manatee County about larger scale Manatee River oyster restoration that would be occurring during this fiscal year. So we're really targeting those funds for those potential restoration projects. Project that we're utilizing the river plan fund is related to the Old Tampa Bay issues that we've been facing. So this comes out of the heels of submitting a reasonable plan to DEP and EPA, highlighting how our future management strategy has been implemented over the past 5 years, and some of the struggles we did reach small Tampa Bay in terms of meeting under audit consistently, and now maintain CDS cover consistently. So this Old Tampa Bay similar capacity assessment will be direct and some resources that looking at the future budget for Old Tampa Bay needs to be adjusted to bring that to be safe. We need water quality conditions supportive of CDS recovery. We'll be mentioning some additional things we have to look forward to see that a bit through and probably go into RFP later. We'll also be presenting this to the next year management sorting in February 20. Had some preliminary discussion with DEP and since submitted all the reasonable plan. That is sort of the strategy moving forward on how to get the data. So we'll be also presenting some of their findings at the upcoming February next year. The other technical projects relate to continue to develop some of the key indicators and dashboard tools that we use to convey the health of Tampa Bay. Also looking to support stormwater retrofits and EMP implementation in upper Tampa Bay, particularly the River with very Pasco County potential projects in Cypress Creek or watershed to use future flows to Hillsborough Bay. And then also looking at supporting some additional fishery monitoring in major river systems that don't currently have consistent monitoring. Other options are also being explored with FWI in terms of expanding some fishery. That rounds out some of the technical projects that we're contemplating for this upcoming fiscal year. On the outreach and education side, we will continue to support our day-to-day programs who've been doing a great job of working to identify opportunities to get the community out on the weekends to help with the restoration and recovery. Newer project that we're going to kick off is more experiential education opportunities with local groups and underserved watershed. So whether it's either kayak, some of the natural spaces is really exposing people that don't get an opportunity to kick off that project this year. In terms of our core outreach and communication, we're going to continue to opportunistically put out our research and the digital ads, as well as other publications to share opportunities for the program for restoration. We have a program to fund projects that have a benefit for the Tampa Bay District. And then we're bringing on some new staff, also further developing behavior change projects and social marketing campaigns for some of our key projects that we wrapping up this year. So as I mentioned, those projects inclusive of our operating cost, this total grant proposal up to $1.7 million. There's opportunity between now and May to receive additional input. If there's alternative concepts that you all want to explore to implement the CCNP, There's opportunity to do that between now and May. And at the May meeting, that's when we would finalize this application and then that's where this submit to EPA. Typically have an agreement in place with EPA or September timeframe start or this year. It's October. That's when these projects and this funding. That was a real high level overview of the work plan. There are within the body of the close to 90 pages at this point, highlights of our other grant projects. So we'll have some updates on the restore funding that we received as a program. Some of the grant programs that we administer, the big so were selected this past November that will be included this year, as well as cheaper projects that have been formally accepted and funded, as well as our person perfect for a lot of we submitted last October. There's like before that great projects. We were selecting for my part. When we finalized the May, we also we had an idea. There's some additional funds that we could use for the bill funds for year 3. So that's $109,000 in funding. 2 restoration themes that the board had previously adopted. Continue to have pre-restoration for aging and wastewater infrastructure to region. So those were for the umbrella of restoration for developments appropriate for the development. So we would like to get an idea of for our application later this fall, potential bill project. That later. So I'll stop there and see if you guys had any questions on the program. Said it's linked in the document. The budget.
What's your timeline?
If you may, where we can include the changes in the report.
Action is to conceptually approve the draft fiscal year 24 US EPA work plan and further discussion. All those in favor of the action recommended, say aye. Opposed?
Page 12, page 12 here. It's just a couple of things to highlight. Just wanted to recognize that we did bring on 2 new staff over this last period. Last board meeting, Stephanie Firm came into their staff in early December, so they've been looking out for our administrative operations program. So very helpful in terms of auditors. Yeah. So we certainly work. We also have Dr. Blake Simmons, really environmental scientist, and a lot of behaviors campaigns working in Maya and develop community and that the human dimensions that we could utilize to further restoration activities. Well, as I mentioned, briefly work plan. We just submitted the latest regional first plan up to the Department of Protection as well as EPA at the end of this past calendar year, at the end of December. That basically formalizes the water quality conditions as well as seagrass conditions of the bay over the past 5 years. we completed the 2017 to 2021 period. Over that 5-year period, as we've been briefing the boards fairly routinely, is that we've had some struggles with sort of the water quality condition that, as we'll see, was covered today. And really, the next management sort of has been the instrumental body we've been working on to ensure that nutrient load. So that document basically addresses the federally recognized TMDL as well as the state's determination that the primary is rural. The struggles that over this past 5-year kind of highlight a new path forward, and that was outlined in the reasonable document we'll be briefing the consortium at the February meeting. As I mentioned, we'll look at the nutrient budget for Old Tampa Bay, for that they segment in particular, anything political conditions, namely due to persistent summertime heat, higher daily volatility. We're looking at both potential nutrient reduction products as well as additional complementary actions to improve tidal circulation or improve shellfish filtration rates in that bay segment to get that bay segment. So we have both research as well as other implementation projects that we've been investigating. As I read back in November, we're also expecting some significant restore funding to help develop a multi-year Tampa Bay further doing stormwater very good activities and that hopefully have a water quality benefit. Our initial estimates of work that we needed to happen in the Old Tampa Bay segment about 90 to really level. That's a really significant amount of similar activities. So where we could do activities or at what scale sort of the next steps of what we need to store. And that work will funnel into the next map. We're developing the next regional update to DEP that would cover the period. So if you haven't had a chance to look at it, I encourage you all to look at the regional responsibilities we are collectively embracing in the region to get the bay back on track and really get Seagrass to where they need to be in the future. So I just wanted to make mention of that in the director's report. And if any of your entities are not consistently going to the measurement management, so I mentioned the next this February 22nd, we'll be talking for you sort of this next step of the work as well as the issues statewide. We have seen significant decline in cigarette numbers in the upper bay segments and in the
I know many of you have had changes in your staff over the past 5-year period. So if there are different contacts that we need to be including on those mailing lists for the nitrogen management consortium, please let me know. I would appreciate it.
So would it be beneficial to have a recap of the meeting at these meetings to bring some of that back with this group that we can't attend, or if we have a chat of it, just bringing back?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the past we've also tried to include them in the technical advisory committee reports. So we give also a link to the whole meeting. It's going to be recorded, so we'll miss that meeting. Have the opportunity to look at the videos after that. One other thing I just want to mention, as a national SHA program, we our EPA evaluation. This happens every 5 years as well. EPA this year covered the July 2017 September 2022 period. So we will formally submit a package that highlights the activities of the program that period of time to EPA. They will come down and actually site visit, do did this for projects, meet with all. To discuss our progress in implementing the CCP, and issue a letter of whether we're actually doing so in terms of the CCP. And this is sort of formality we do very well in this program evaluation, but I just think it's the this year, we're actually starting the PhD, we're having a technical advisory committee meeting, so we can do some site visits. All and highlight some of the projects that were previously numbers that we received as a program. Last thing, just want to mention, if you are aware, the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration is currently accepting proposals. These proposals are due to the program March 15th, 2023. Jessica Lewis is now managing the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund, and she has some updates to highlight if you want to learn more about that.
Webinar today, November 15th. I sent an email to many of you yesterday. Let anyone know if you may be interested in applying for the TBRIC program. They can come and learn about the application process. Also, some of you have a return on investment document at your places. If you, one of our partners, part of the interlocal agreement, Joe designed these, they're really beautiful. And this just shows what you get with your contributions to TDEP. So check those out. There's a few extra copies that you can bring back to your staff. We also have a PNG version that you can post on social media to your including newsletter. If you would like those versions.
Just make another plug for those of you who are considering applying to the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund this year. The application is different. It's not a Word document the same way it has been in the past. We're asking people to put together the proposal in the form of the scope of work. So there are some changes, and so it'll be beneficial to participate in this webinar if you haven't sort of looked through what we're asking here.
In the research side, is it all firmly planted in habitat, or is there? I know you kind of mentioned in the picture, it looks so streamlined to that. Just want to know about the bridge. And is that
We're probably not going to go into all of the, like, reviewing every single research priority that's included in the CCMP or all of the different CCMP actions. So I think a broad participation is good and would be appropriate because all of those activities are eligible. It's just that we're trying to prioritize a few on the ground restoration projects this year. We've funded quite a few applied research projects over the past several years, and fewer on the ground water quality improvement or habitat restoration. So that's why the priorities were focused towards those kinds of things. But certainly for applied research projects, anything that's in the CCMP and those research and monitoring priorities is relevant. And there are, many examples of that work that you all do at FWC. So
Sheila.
Thanks, Ed. I just want to let everybody know that the giveaway season is upon us. So for those of you who are unaware, we do these days around the watershed, typically in parks and preserves, with different partners. One event a month. So these events typically include volunteers removing invasive species, cleaning up trash and other debris, or doing some native species planting. So our next volunteer event is going to be February 25th at Tom Bennett Park in Manatee County. So this is a very large planting. So if you are interested in putting some sweat equity into today, then please come out, encourage your staff, friends and family to come out and help us store it at the bay. Or if you or your staff have any restoration projects that can use volunteers to help implement, please let me know.
Advisory Committee report, which is on page 13 and 14 of your packet. I'm going to go through the details, but view the technical report. Applications, peer-reviewed applications, and the committee meetings. There's also links to the documents, the final, the 2023 reasonable assurance documents linked there. If you wanted to review that. Additionally, I did want to highlight the TAC meeting January, and would encourage folks to go back and watch that meeting. Specifically, Tampa Bay, but preliminary CRF map was all sort of under there, and they're really just it's not where we want to be as a region, and collectively, we are all accountable for it. So everything that we can do as leadership within our organizations, it's getting the word out. We would encourage you to do so. At the event was in 2014, when we were all standing out there celebrating hitting a milestone that many of us did not think that we would hit in our careers or in our lifetime. And to slide back this far, it's just, to me, it's personally and professionally dishonest. So we got to find a way back, and so I would encourage you to admit, you don't have time to watch the whole meeting, which was very good, some great presentations. At least fast forward to Senate statutes to see our results. We can know that. I believe those results are either going to be announced on Monday from Switzerland.
Yeah. Being at the Sarah, bodily.
Also, Kelly, just want to offer that in light of these results, we are putting together resources, kind of like we did for Piney Point, with some talking points, so we can all be, providing the same messages to the community. So in our board follow-ups, I'll be sharing those resources with you all as well.
I think it's been very important that, our leadership, all of our leadership and our organizations know about this. That is incumbent on all of us to work together to get our path, get us moving forward on a better path than where we are right now. And the only thing that is going on right now at the state level is they are updating the statewide stormwater rule. And I will say, having, been on attack for that, right now there's not a lot, there's a lot of industry involvement, there's not a lot of other involvement. And it's, the statewide stormwater rule has not been updated since 1985. We know that the rules that have been on the books since 1985 are completely deficient. They do not provide reasonable assurance. They do not treat water to a standard that is protected. So getting a better rule on the books is imperative. So our voice is important. Your voices are important. Getting that, information out there and ensuring that people are paying attention, because I expect whatever happens this legislative session with regard to that rule, we're going to be stuck with that rule for another 3 years. So this is the moment. Draft rule is online. Search FDEP statewide stormwater rule. There, please provide your public comment and feedback on that. This is it's moving quickly. There's obviously, as you can imagine, a lot of opposition. But I don't think they're hearing from all sides of the issue, and they need. Do my normal plug. The tag's getting old. please bring younger people to the mix. We're trying to grow the tag, you know. The topics are very, membership is not so much. So I'm just saying, please bring a friend. Get involved because they are the future of the tag. And we need them. We need their brains, we need their energy, we need their ideas. They're gonna be sitting right here one day.
Speaking of young scientists, I just want to mention that the advanced-story program brought on an intern for the semester, Olivia Schlick. On the side there, so he's going to be helping out with our research and monitoring projects, revisions, and basically outreaching into the community, especially into colleges and universities, to see what types of research and monitoring they do. Welcome, Olivia. She'll be with us till we.
Bring friends.
On the industry side. I'm sure you guys are dealing with the same issue on the government side, but we're resourced to bring the same for a lot. With a lot of research supply. Anything you guys can do to encourage and reach out to us, because I think if folks are coming in more over, and they get our mindset, good mindset, thinking about we get those folks in there. But anything we can get from that program, like all to, you know, their partners, that something we can put on the meetings and say, look, this is important. It's the time for the certainly.
Yeah, we'd be happy to reach out to industry folks. Presentations to management. Yeah. But I mean, even a letter, hey, we need more people, as you said. It's getting older, the season.
Thank you.
We have a new co-chair. Yeah, that's right. We have a new co-chair. So,
He's in the Philippines right now.
and so, yeah, so Dr. Ryan Moyer is our new TAP co-chair, so we have the next meeting. All the hands, please show up.
Yeah, sure, he's part of that.
On January 25th, we met in person for a change. It was very nice at Leaden Island, and we didn't have a huge turnout, but we had a pretty good turnout. And we viewed the new Deer Tank Bay documentary featuring Maya, which was great, and we discussed that, and we did the Green Coast test from National Wildlife Federation. And then we participated in the same coastal and ocean acidification network stakeholder feedback project that the TAC recently did, to just gauge the knowledge and attitudes about ocean acidification among the CAC members. We reviewed the updated Tampa's Bay State of the Bay report, and we're reminded to share that within our network, so let everybody know what good things are happening and what good things need to happen around the bay. We reviewed the upcoming volunteer events, the Give a Day for the Bay, and other things that are coming up. And we also briefly discussed the the PCMP update coming up, and we're hoping to
create a subcommittee where we can assign different CAC members, sections of the CCMP, review and provide comment. Our next meeting is scheduled for April 19th, and that will be a online meeting. Personally, I did a talk on January 21st about the Pinellas Park Library about those plans, but I really focused it on the environmental benefits of doing natural landscaping and native plants and stormwater and air pollution reduction. I had a great turnout. I had about 25 people. And also there will be an Earth Day celebration and volunteer work day at the HB Sanderman Center on April 22nd. And the rain garden there is a Tampa Bay mini grant project. And so they asked me if I'd come and talk about native plants. But of course I will be promoting PBE too. I believe that, and checking out the project, I haven't been out there since they put up the signage, which talked about this, the stormwater benefits of the rain garden, and pollinator habitat creation. So I'll be checking that out and then, you know, just talking to people and how they're doing there. That's all I have.
Evaluation study update.
And very well. That has occurred since the 2014 studies. Give an overview of some of
Hi, thank you so much for having us. My name is Alana Todd. I'm the environmental planner here. I'm joined by my, it's much. You can keep going. Okay, I'm joined by my colleague, Harry Walsh. He's our economic development planner. We'll be presenting to you the results of our evaluation study that we've been doing over the past year. Okay. Great, thank you. So I thought I would start off with some context, highlight some of the ways in which Tampa Bay produces value for the region. So in an economic sense, some of the Bay's value is related to estuary-dependent industries. The value that we directly measure comes from marketable goods and services that are tied to estuary-dependent industries, their production and distribution processes. We also get value from employment in these industries. And then the Bay is also valuable for the amenities and the cultural services that it provides. It's beautiful. That's why it's so expensive to have a waterfront view in your backyard. We recreate in it, we study it, and we work really, really hard to protect it because it's a part of who we are. It's a part of our storytelling. It's a part of our shared history. It's part of our heritage. And even when we aren't directly using the resources of Tampa Bay, we're still benefiting from the services that its ecosystems continue to provide in its everyday functions, like capturing carbon through photosynthesis and removing pollutants from the water and providing habitat to our beloved wildlife. So it's quite difficult to quantify all of those streams of value, but for the last year, the TBRPC has analyzed several of them in a project funded by the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund. The resulting report is an update to a similar one that we did in 2014, but we used different methodologies for this one. The purpose of the study is to provide an economic valuation of the natural resources in the Tampa Bay estuary and its surrounding watershed. So we used 2019 economic data and we adjusted for inflation to 2022 dollars. We made that decision because of the different market disruptions from the COVID-19 pandemic. And there were two primary objectives for this study. The first one was to demonstrate Tampa Bay's value as an economic, a social, and environmental driver by identifying the various contributions of the Bay to our regional economy and our well-being. And in doing so, we really hope that the final report will help to educate the public on the importance of the Bay. And so hopefully that'll kind of guide some of our policy making all the various management decisions going on. And the second objective is really to establish a replicable process for performing evaluation of Tampa Bay using the best available data. So it's important to note that unlike the 2014 report, we did not use surveys for this report. There were too many assumptions, wasn't really defensible in our opinion, so we really just relied on the publicly available data sources. And I also want to highlight that during this project, we had 2 stakeholder meetings, and those were comprised of economists and environmental scientists from around the state. And so there were 3 kinds of value streams that we tried to capture in this study. The first was the economic contributions. That includes output, it includes wages and employment by Bay-related industries. By what we group the industries into sectors, which is what Harry will go over. So we conducted an economic impact analysis to reveal that economic footprint. We also estimated the impact of Bay proximity to property values using hedonic analysis to reveal those property premiums. And then we know the Bay's ecosystems provide other sources of value that are increasingly recognized in the literature. So we quantify 3 of those services, and they include carbon sequestration, denitrification, and flood mitigation services provided by various inland and coastal habitats throughout the watershed. And then I also wanted to highlight the boundary for our study aligned with the boundary of the watershed. So that includes parts of 6 counties, and we collected data from businesses whose zip codes were within that watershed. So we do have a part of our report that kind of goes county by county, but it's restricted to that watershed. And I will turn it over to Harry to go through our economic impact analysis and the hedonic analysis.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Alana. Again, I'm Harry Walsh, Economic Development Planner on staff, and usually when I'm in this room and speaking, it's to our Council of Elected Officials, hence my default to suit and tie. I promise I am not usually this formal on a Friday. But so we did, one of the first ways that we wanted to value the economy of the watershed was an industry footprint study, meaning what is the footprint left if you were to remove that industry or that sector from the area. This is also called a contribution analysis, as in what is that sector contributing to the rest of the economy. And so there's direct contribution, this is direct employment, this is output that's produced, and from that output, what are they paying their employees? And then you have indirect, which is all of the supply chain related impacts, upstream and downstream, logistics, any services that are needed, any technology that needs to be purchased. And then you also have an induced impact, which is household spending. So you now have all these people working, they're getting an income, they're going to go and buy groceries, healthcare, clothing, things for amusement. So you have those 3 impacts, and then in total, we're calling that the total footprint of each of these industry sectors. So based on NOAA's Blue Economy report, we determined 8 general sectors that we wanted to look at. These are comprised of industries. We did most of this analysis in InPlan, all which the industries are listed in the report and can be easily converted to NAICS industries that are much more commonly used. So the 8 were living resources, construction, marine transportation, mineral extraction, ship and boat building, tourism and recreation, research, and defense. And I'll kind of quickly go through each of them and then give like a kind of a total number at the end of this. And these are just listed in ascending order in terms of the total output. So first we have ship and boat building. Obviously we have major ports, we have commercial fisheries, we have recreational boating, all of which serves this industry all serves that demand, not just in terms of new vessels, but also the maintenance and repair and sustaining of all of these vessels. Next, research. So obviously there is a lot of research, a lot of people employed in research, and I'm talking to a group of mostly scientists here. So this isn't all of the folks working in research in the watershed. These are specifically folks who are working on environmental or ecological sorts of fields, people who are doing conservation, people who are involved in mitigation or something directly related to the watershed or in some way. Next is construction. Same thing. Construction is absolutely massive in Tampa Bay and in Florida generally. So if I were to include every single person working construction, this number would it'd be 10 times as high. These are specifically construction purposes that are related to the watershed. Building seawalls, doing mitigation and conservation work, building bridges, or working on the bridges, things that deal with the water, or building structures or adapting structures to deal with storm and disaster recovery. Defense, we are in a strategic coastal location, which is why we have several military installations, the largest of which is MacDill Air Force Base in the south of Tampa. It employs quite a few people directly, and if you've ever been in that area, there's a huge apparatus of every other sort of supporting thing in that area. Living resources is all of the growing crops, aquaculture, fishing. Well, fishing is aquaculture, and then logging. Everything that grows or swims in this area, which obviously is quite large and employs a lot of people. Marine transportation, we have several ports, we have a lot of sightseeing, we have cruises that leave from the Tampa Bay area. And I believe just alone, the Port of Tampa Bay has something like, is it 30 billion a year or something like that in impact, so huge amounts of total throughput of goods. So this includes freight as well as some pleasure craft. Now, mineral extraction, we really wanted to include because the estuary is geologically unique. So one of the things that we are noted for is we are one of the rare areas in the world that has a significant deposit of phosphates, a phosphatic material that is mostly used to make fertilizer. So we send a lot of raw phosphates out of the area. We also make fertilizer and send that out of the area, and it is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And so for better or for worse, mineral extraction is absolutely massive watershed, and we wanted to include it as one of the dependent industries sectors. And then finally, tourism and recreation. As you might expect, Florida is a very touristy state, and our area draws a lot of people in. So we wanted to look at specifically tourism and recreation related industries that we could really say were dependent on the water in some way. So we didn't want to just include all eating and drinking places because, the diner down the street from my house probably is not pulling people in and doesn't really have anything to do with the water. So we only looked at those, say like hotels, eating and drinking places, attractions that were actually in some way coastal or alongside the bay or the major tributaries. So the number of people that are working in tourism and recreation related industries is certainly larger than this. This was the portion of that we felt confident saying is dependent on the estuary. So adding all of those together, each one of these two is the total of the direct, indirect, and induced. We have 31.6 billion each year in total output for in Tampa Bay watershed area, and this supports 207,000 jobs just about, which is about 11%, so a little bit over 1 in 10 jobs are directly dependent on the estuary in some way. Then going from the industry contribution analysis side of things, just wanted to pull water as an input, and specifically an industrial input. So we're not talking about drinking water or anything like that, just the large uses. We have pretty granular data, so I kind of just combined some of the largest uses and into what broadly they're doing. One of the main things is cooling for electric power generation. So both fossil and thermoelectric use this. Obviously, when you think water and electricity, you probably think hydroelectric, which is not really something we do around here, but we do quite a bit of fossil. And then this number that I'm reporting is specifically thermoelectric, which is a bit more renewable for total output. Next categories, these are just in terms of gallons per year used. You can see these are in billions. So crop irrigation, aquaculture, mining and quarrying, and also fertilizer production. Mixing uses quite a bit of water. And as I said before, all of those phosphates, we do a lot of the actual processing into fertilizer here within the watershed. And then going on to property values. So we did a lit review of some of the previous analyses of property values in water. And we found some that were dealing with water quality. Kuyama et al. Was a kind of an inspiration for what we ended up doing. But we wanted to look at proximity. What does proximity to the water do to property values? So we ended up, talked about that before. So we ended up taking parcel data. We had, I think it was over 600,000 observations of single family parcels within the watershed. There were 120 different variables from the property appraiser that we could use. We kind of did an iterative testing process and found that there were about 6 of them that were statistically significant on the appraised value and on sale price. All of that is going to be in the full report. I'm just going to be talking about the appraised value because it's a little bit more computational on how it's found. Sale price has a whole bunch of things that can affect it that aren't just these figures. So we looked at the size of the land, the size of the livable area, the age of the property, any special features, any new construction, as well as a buffer that we created a quarter mile from the bay and major tributaries. And we found that when you include, you account for all of these other things that might add to the property value, that proximity to the bay for a single family household being within a quarter mile of the bay adds about $62,000 to the appraised value of the house. And then if you take that and you multiply it by the properties that are within a quarter mile, you get about $3.8 billion added in what we're calling amenity value to those single family properties. And then with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Alana to look at ecosystem services.
Where's the charger? The charger.
Not sure. Sorry, folks. Hopefully we have enough juice for this presentation. Yes.
Try and go quickly. Okay, great. So starting with ecosystem services, so they represent the direct or indirect contributions that ecosystems make to our well-being. Most of these services do not produce marketed outputs, like the provision of habitat, for instance. And as a result, those values are a lot less visible. They're often left out of valuations, cost-benefit analyses, and decision-making. And so as a result, they're kind of assigned this implicit value of 0. So that's why I really wanted to make sure to bring it into this valuation. One way to make these goods and services is to demonstrate their economic value or society's willingness to pay for these services. And so we attempted to quantify this value for 3 regulating services that are provided by various coastal and upland habitats. So that includes carbon sequestration, denitrification services, and flood protection. I'm going to be going over the first 2. Flood protection, we're still kind of polishing our final results after our stakeholder meeting we had back in December. So for sequestration, we all in here know that estuarine and coastal ecosystems play a really important role in regulating climate by sequestering carbon. They're among the most productive habitats for this service. And so using known carbon sequestration rates, we estimated the yearly sequestration of mangrove forests, salt marshes, pine flatwoods, seagrasses, freshwater wetlands, and shrub and brushland habitats. We found that these habitats sequester nearly 600,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide every year, which when valued is approximately 52.3 million annually. In addition to that, there is more than 60 million tons of carbon currently stored in the vegetation and the soil of these habitats. And as a fun fact, that is equivalent to the annual emissions of 13.2 million cars. So for denitrification services, it's another service that estuarine habitats provide. It's natural water treatment. If healthy, they're really effective at removing nutrients like nitrogen. I think it's really important to keep in mind that we need to remove the nutrient pollution before it enters surface waters. And bay habitats are not a substitute for proper treatment of water. I just wanted to sort of preface with that. But we do recognize their value in providing this really important service, and it should be reflected in an estuary evaluation. So in our analysis, we looked at mangrove forests, salt marshes, oyster bars, seagrasses, and freshwater wetlands. And together, those habitats process more than 16 million pounds of nitrogen each year in the Tampa Bay estuary, providing approximately 714.3 million worth of denitrification benefits. So those water quality improvements will continue each year if these habitats are left in place and they are healthy and operating at their maximum capacity. So in summary, the Tampa Bay estuary supports many of the leading industries and jobs in the region, and it's a key driver of our economy. We also see benefits beyond those directly contributing to our economy, resulting from other supporting and regulating services provided by the estuary's ecosystems. And since we're the management board here, I wanted to point out some management implications. Restoration and protection efforts are needed now more than ever, and it's really to ensure these natural resources thrive and so that future generations can continue to benefit from them just as we are today. And it's my hope that the methodologies that we've established in this report can be expanded upon in the future with more site-specific data to inform cost-benefit analyses and management and development decisions. And fingers crossed, we're hoping to have the report published next month. So that is our presentation for you. We're happy to take any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
But how does it compare?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the 2014 report really relied on survey data, and we saw that. So in terms of those jobs that rely on the estuary, they were including, accountants that said that they lived near the water, and so the bay, their job is, influenced by the bay. So we did not use survey data. We used more revealed preference methods rather than stated. So that is really the largest difference. And I would say the same thing for many of the port valuations we saw, like Port Tampa Bay, they did a similar economic valuation, but they also used survey data. So we really relied on data sourced from like publicly available sources.
And is there an argument or like we broke down into these 8 different sectors and the ones I think about shipping and like a lot of these, yes, they depend on essence of the bay, but not necessarily the bay. So, I mean, are those the primary drivers of the valuation? And is there an argument to be made?
I'll say, yeah, there's kind of two things you're hitting on there. So we didn't want to just give one number of the value of the bay is X billion dollars. And so we have a few different things, like all the things that Alana was talking about with ecosystem services, that depends on a healthy environment, absolutely. But yes, you're right that technically shipping could happen even if the water was absolutely devoid of life. It really doesn't rely on that. But
it's still dependent on the estuary.
Yeah, it's still dependent on the estuary system. And there's all of these co-location effects which is kind of what Alana was talking about, where there are all of these other industries that we're not even including that are dependent on all of this other economic activity happening. So the idea is if some of these directly dependent industries on the estuary being healthy were to disappear, a lot of these other things would also be likely leaving the area.
Right, and it's pretty difficult to parse out which ones are dependent on the bay and which ones depend on a healthy bay. And so, trying to establish a replicable methodology that does that, it was challenging. This was part of a lot of our discussions in the beginning of this project. And so we decided to pick a scenario of if the bay didn't exist, if it wasn't here, then which industries would be impacted by that. And so that's sort of the situation that we chose going into this.
Yeah, the bay we're not using. It's just framing.
Right.
Changes in how you reach data. So.
And I think that's a great area for future research, is to go in and try and parse out which of those really are dependent on the healthy bay. And that will probably rely on some of that survey data. And so that was just kind of out of the scope of this project, doing surveys. So it's definitely an area for future research.
I don't think we're going to change over time. I mean, I guess there's a lot of things coming into play too.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, theoretically, yeah, the methodologies that we established, anyone can go back and redo these, and the data that we're using, it's all recorded, it's historical data. So yeah, they can definitely go back and build on our methodology, and we hope that people will do that.
So if you're just talking about the economic side of it, this is just a snapshot in time based on actual reported data on BLS, BEA, and census. So we're not doing, there's no growth involved in this. We're just
It's
doing,
for 1 year.
yeah, 2019 adjusted to 2022 for dollars.
You would, absolutely.
One thing what I was thinking is we wasn't really dependent, maybe necessarily on, even the bay. I mean, you see the, alignment and closures happening, and so they look at some of that. My question was, I have a few, but the first one was the defense, somebody from the defense industry or sector involved in the stakeholder group giving input that, yes, it's dependent on the bay. The reason the bill is here is because of the bay here. We couldn't just pick it up and put it somewhere else. So there is a connection to the bay.
Right. No, we didn't have someone exactly with the defense industry on there, but going into this valuation, we looked at NOAA's, they had a blue economy report. And so all of our sectors are modeled after that report. And we saw that in many valuations, they did include defense. And we were really thinking like Coast Guard when we went into it, but we included all of defense. And so, you know, we designed the report. It's kind of in piecemeal. We have numbers for each and every sector. And so if someone, you know, wanted to cite our results and they weren't interested in including defense, then you could absolutely take that out. You can choose whichever sectors you want to include those numbers for. We have all the data in the report.
And you have it broken out. Makes sense, but you have so many different organizations, Army, Air Force, probably Navy. There's so much still that some of it would move, but maybe some of it doesn't make sense here. So is it parsed out by, the different branches?
So that is not, because the data set we're using, it was anyone who was on federal military payroll. So that was who was determined to be involved in defense. So that is including a variety of different things. It's including, to some extent, Army National Guard, located in Tampa or St. Pete. So it could be broken out, but just in terms of replicability, we wanted to use this one data set that we know everyone can get. So
It's in plan.
Yeah, which is in plan. So, and part of the final report documents will be like CSVs, where you could literally, if you had access to InPlan, import the CSV and you'll get spit out the results in your portal that I had to make this report. So you could do that, but you'd have to get another data source to separate it out, which a lot of times just doing a little research, the defense often doesn't, they don't publish very specific information for national security reasons. So I had to use what I had. Yeah. So there will be, we did not, this was just specifically single family. One of the reasons we did that is just, we wanted something, the way that the residential real estate market works and the commercial real estate market works are related but distinct. And so we wanted to look at just the single family comparable properties. You could though, like with the current methodology we made, you could adapt that to commercial. I think you might have to include a few other factors instead of like just the size of the building. Like I think maybe specific location, like strategically on cross streets or directly beachfront might have more of an impact. Just speculating on that there, but we did not look at commercial. We just looked at real estate.
Part of the rationale for that is we wanted this report to be more comparable to some of the other economic valuations for other estuaries throughout the state of Florida. And so this residential property premium for waterfront homes or water adjacent homes. It's one of those values that our sister estuary programs report on, and so we wanted to make sure we had a value that was,
A great point, and do you think that should make that with the given list for the policy board?
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
It's what, good or bad, these valuations have to arrive at a number somewhere. I think this establishes a new baseline that will hopefully to be able to track over time, those changes to the baseline, good or bad. Their net values are open and make certain decisions in the future of how to park that first. So that was beneficial. So, I think, the also Camp Bay, the regulating services, and the amount of habitats that we're tracking. That would probably be the messaging part in terms of evaluation, a lot of those habitats and the regulating services they provide. That might be some.
This type of work with the other communities. I can add, I can just tell you beyond a doubt, during the tide events, I was getting significant people, from that area, and they're just the stench of dead fish is just so the Coast Guard called because their bays were filled with dead fish and it was affecting their operations. Yeah. So there, I think, for those who, I know a lot of them don't have this experience. I'm fortunate that I probably should be on their list for testing for all of the robotoxins I've been exposed to when working these events. But it makes you sick. Really sick. And if the folks at McGill are outside and we have bad rules up there and there's toxins, maybe they wouldn't. So I realize that it's really hard to kind of look about some of the direct relationships, but sometimes it's the indirect relationships that problems that are very, very difficult to establish and connect all those dots, but they do exist.
Yeah, thanks for pointing out that account. And I took out my red tide slide. I did have one of these. But
No, I was there were restaurants on the intercoastal that called every single morning asking if we could get the areas cleaned up with much fresh so that people could sit outside and not.
yeah,
So it's I think a clean day affects a lot more industries and work environments than we're done because it's an indirect not.
Yeah, I think we've set up some repeatable methodologies. We did the red tide economic assessment as well. So we set up repeatable methods there so we could document some of these more event specific economic impacts that maybe take into account some of both the direct and indirect economic effects of these kinds of things. And I think that's maybe more appropriate ways to better understand some of these nuanced situations. What we're trying to do here is take out all of the guesswork that was in those prior reports, because we really couldn't stand up here and say beyond a shadow of a doubt that we have confidence in those numbers, because the value of a healthy bay, that part of the counterfactual, was all based on people like you and me sitting in a room saying, yeah, I bet about 30% of dentists are tied to a healthy bay or whatever. So that's not something we can stand behind. It's better to sort of document these things that have true market values and that we feel are or that we know from federal reporting and that are standardized in other places, that we can get a handle on what those direct impacts are, and then we can use sort of one-offs to infer some of the more nuanced information.
right. Question?
I haven't seen any pushback online.
For this opportunity to present. Yes.
Some of these will flash it up. Yeah, it's working perfect. If I make this full screen, I'll screw up whatever you just did. All right, morning, everybody. About this time every year, I have the honor of telling you how good the Bay is doing. So it's exactly what I'll be doing today. On your at your seats, there's our 2-pager water quality report card. That's our flagship document that we put out every year that really summarizes water quality trends that we saw for each year. I'll be talking about that as well as a couple other things. I'll be co-presenting with Carrie. This is going to be a little bit longer than previous updates we've given on State of the Bay because we are covering other things besides water quality. I really appreciate the fact that Kelly kind of ripped off the Band-Aid about seagrass. You know, we'll be talking more about that and some of the details. Yeah, it's quite sobering, but there's some specifics about where the losses occurred and you know how we might consider moving forward from there. So yes, start off with this 2022 seagrass results. This is our long-term graphic that we usually show each time we get an update on these numbers. These numbers come out about every 2 years using aerial maps from the Water Management District. And this 2022 results was another punch in the gut. The 2018 to 2020 loss was, you know, a punch in the gut as well. We were hoping that 2022 wasn't nearly as bad or would maybe, you know, kind of plateau off, but we did see a loss again of seagrass bay-wide of about 4,000 acres. So well below our coverage goal that we are anticipating for the bay. That red line is our coverage goal. It was previously 38,000 acres, which was a 1950s benchmark period that we were considering pristine. We actually, because we're overachievers, upped that goal to 40,000 acres in 2020. And this reflects basically where we think we can be based on what the historical values have been at its all-time high in 2016. So again, kind of sobering news there. And this is the first time since we've had reports of seagrasses that there's been a consecutive loss over 3 reporting periods. So the last 3 reporting periods has been declines in seagrass. So not news y'all want to hear, but these are the facts. And you know, hopefully we can figure out a way to reverse these trends. Breaking it down by bay segment, you know, we can kind of look at where these losses have occurred. It's not like the whole bay itself lost seagrass. It was in very specific locations. So most of the losses we saw were in Old Tampa Bay and Hillsborough Bay. And do note that the scales on these axes are different. So Old Tampa Bay has, or sorry, Hillsborough Bay has much less seagrass than Old Tampa Bay. But we did see some pretty drastic losses relatively based on the numbers that we have in both of those bays. Middle Tampa Bay, Lower Tampa Bay. So basically the further you get down towards the Gulf, the lower or the less losses you see in seagrasses. This is not a new phenomenon. I mean, anytime we see seagrasses kind of changing, it tends to happen in these upper bay segments where there's a lot more freshwater inputs or other water quality issues that might be impacting the environments for seagrasses. And also these red lines here, I should mention, these are not necessarily targets for each bay segment, but when we look at the overall like 40,000 acre target for the bay, if we break that out proportionally to each bay segment, these red lines provide kind of a rough estimate of where we think we
we could be in terms of, a healthy seagrass environment for each bay segment. So you'll see that, again, Old Tampa Bay and Hillsborough Bay are now well below, what we consider a healthy seagrass community for each of those segments. But Middle Tampa Bay, Lower Tampa Bay, kind of doing okay. The other thing to note too is that in Old Tampa Bay, 2022, this is the lowest it's ever been measured in that bay segment for the period of record we have. So this is now like the current worst case scenario that we have on record for Old Tampa Bay. Again, kind of sobering news, but these are the facts. These are looking at some of the other minor bay segments. So Boca Ciega Bay, Teresilla Bay, Manatee River. Again, these are more in the lower bay segments, so fairly stable. This is not atypical for these locations. The numbers here are fairly good. So these are less of a concern, but I wanted to show these to you nonetheless to kind of make the point that the lower bay segments tend to be doing quite much better in terms of the seagrass coverages compared to Old Tampa Bay and Hillsborough Bay. And I debated showing this graphic because it is slightly confusing, but I think it portrays the results in a context that kind of puts the current values into perspective relative to kind of our worst case scenario, and kind of maybe shows the silver lining in terms of where we're at now. But basically, each set of columns is a base segment, right? And so the numbers at the top are these sort of extrapolated targets that is where we think we could or should be for a healthy base segment based on the overall target of 40,000 acres. And so basically, if every one of these green bars, which is the 2022 current estimate, if every one of these green bars are at 100%, that means we're meeting that segment-specific target, that extrapolated target. So that's kind of where we want it to be. So places like Lower Tampa Bay, Boca Ciega Bay, Teresilla, Manatee River, fairly close to where we want them to be. Other bay segments, again, Old Tampa Bay, Hillsborough Bay, even the bay as a whole are below where we think they could be as a percentage. And these gray bars, this is our 1982 worst case estimate of when the bay was at its worst. So the silver lining, sort of, if you want to look at it that way, is, for most of the bay segments, we're still better than our worst case scenario. We are losing seagrasses, so the trend is not good, but we're still, the coverage is higher than it was when the bay was really degraded. The exception being Old Tampa Bay. So now this is the worst case scenario, the lowest documented seagrass coverage we have ever seen for that bay segment. So not good. I also wanted to show you the transect results. So sometimes there's confusion about the different products we put out and what data are used to drive them. All of the previous slides I showed you were based on the district coverage maps. So aerial surveys that document acreages, coverage extent of the different seagrass habitats. The SRA program also coordinates transect monitoring efforts every year. So our partners are a huge part of that. And we kind of facilitate that. We do trainings and make sure people go out and cover their transects, using the same methods. We've been doing that since the 90s, and this is another great source of information we can use to help us understand how the trends and seagrass have been changing over time. And so this is showing a time series with all the results to date for all of the bay segments where we have transects. And this is, most of the bay. And this white line is the total, and this is just frequency occurrence, what is the average, basically how much seagrass is showing up over time. And so this kind of mirrors the long-term trend of recovery of the bay, and then also kind of the current decline in seagrasses that we've seen in the last couple of years. So this is kind of showing us the same information as the district maps, which is good. This is sort of confirming that we can see these trends using different sources of data. But what I want to kind of point out here is that when we talk about like losses of seagrasses, most of the losses we've seen have been losses in Haliduli, so shoal grass. And this occurs, most of the seagrasses in Old Tampa Bay and Hillsborough Bay are Haliduli. So this tends to be the species that is most impacted by changes in coverage. And the other point is that this is Caulerpa, so macroalgae. This doesn't go into the total. The total just reflects SAB or seagrass. We've seen an uptick in Caulerpa with time as well, which is another concerning trend. Seeing kind of seagrasses being replaced by macroalgae. That's something we want to keep an eye on and kind of understand the trade-offs, why that's happening, and also kind of goes back to some of the new projects we have on board. Salinity capacity, nutrient issues, and how all of these things kind of play together to understanding the dynamics of the communities changing.
Hey, Marcus, can you click the review line back on?
Yeah.
Certainly, we've had some questions about whether or not there's potential misidentification of rubia and Talavini going on in the field. So a few years back, if you participated in the seagrass training, we focused specifically on how to make sure you can differentiate between those species. So just another thing to keep in mind for your staff. Those trends might be important for us to understand what's actually leading the way.
Yes. And there's also kind of renewed interest in understanding or rather documenting macroalgae. So Sheila's been doing a lot of work making sure that the crews are more vigilant in identifying the macroalgae species as we're going out each year, because we've realized that this is kind of a new change that we need to be more careful of documenting. So IDing it to species and just recording it so we can have an understanding of how these trade-offs may be happening more realistically each year. The other point is I just want to look at 2016 here. This was actually the year where we had max coverage of seagrasses, but the transect results are kind of showing that dip there. And this could be caused by a few different things. The thing to note with the district maps is when we talk about 2016 coverage, that's actually based on an aerial photo taken in 2015. It takes them about a year to photo digitize all of the acreage maps. The other thing that happened in 2016, 2015, remember we had a lot of storms come through. We had some SSO events. There could be some water quality issues associated with that. But either way, this is a different metric and maybe shows slightly different trends than the coverage maps. And we think that, this is kind of the beginning of sort of the documented decline that we've seen to date. Any questions about the seagrass before I talk about water quality? Again, not great stuff to hear, but this is where we're at. All right. So I wanted to start with the bad news. Now we can kind of transition to some better news. The water quality report card I talked about. If you're not familiar with this,
Sorry. Putting you on the spot a little bit. We have a theory as to why shoal grass.
I'm tempted to punt it to Sheila, but I'll take a stab at it. So as I said, shoal grass, that tends to be more abundant in the upper part of the bay. It tends to be more tolerant of fresh water, right? The upper part of the bay is where most of the nutrients come in. The major rivers coming in, the water quality tends to be, follows a typical estuarine gradient where the water quality tends to be more eutrophic towards the upper part of the bay. And those communities tend to be more susceptible to changes in the conditions. With Old Tampa Bay in particular, there's the Feather Sound region that is on the southern shore. That's a huge shoal that has been really historically ephemeral over time. It's kind of our canary, I guess, for that bay segment. When we do see a lot of seagrass in Old Tampa Bay, it is on Feather Sound as well, and it's primarily Haladuli. So it's a function of just sort of species tolerances to salinity gradients and where the major nutrient inputs are coming into the bay and how that affects water quality. I don't know, Sheila, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, that was good, Marcus. I just want to add to Haladuli, very limited below ground biomass. So these roots are really thin and hair-like. So when it does undergo these stressors, it will slough off its blades, and then it doesn't have as much like carbon stored in its roots to really be able to rebalance. On the other hand, we have our other species like turtle grass, which has really the majority of the plant occurs below ground. So it's much more resilient to some of these changes.
All right.
I think Marcus alluded to 2016, like that, that's sort of at the tail end of the room. Seagrass. For the day, that might have been slow off of, I'd already followed how it really. Start with the cycle block.
Yeah, I encourage everyone to go to the dashboard. I plugged these dashboards a lot when we first developed them, but I know there's a lot of new people here. So these dashboards are a great resource to dive into the numbers a little bit more, and kind of gives you the tools to explore different trends, by location or different time periods, and really goes a lot deeper than these simple plots that I'm putting here. So definitely check those out.
And they're all gonna, that's a maybe ask of each other and think about, grapple with. Not all of us have seen these exact conditions, so.
Yeah, and I think, again, Kelly put it well earlier, that we are all kind of collectively responsible for this. It's not on the SRA program, it's not on Pinellas County, it's on everybody. And the more as a community as we can understand what are the appropriate management actions to mitigate or remediate these problems, that's kind of the way forward. And we can sort of internally think of projects we think are going to address or fill the gap of knowledge in terms of our understanding of what's causing these changes, but we can't necessarily, internally implement these things. It's up to our partners. We can guide, our understanding of what needs to happen and sort of, work as a group, because the positive changes that happened historically were from everybody, the NMC, all of our partners. And moving forward, we've got to have that same mentality, I think, of collectively working together. So. Soapbox. I'm just a mouthpiece for Ed, basically. Okay, so water quality. On kind of some good news. Again, this is the 2-pager on your table there. Just to remind people the purpose this serves. Obviously, every year we kind of update this graphic or this product, but each side kind of has its own purpose, right? So there's one side that has the red, yellow, green stoplight graphic. This is our kind of management focus side. And I'll explain a little bit what that means. This is kind of programmatically how we're doing and kind of serves as a guidepost for what we should do to either move water quality in a different direction. The other side is the regulatory side, and this relates to the TMDL that's in place with the Bay and also is more relevant to the NMC. And this reports whether or not the chlorophyll threshold was attained in any given year. So that graphic is only red and green based on whether the chlorophyll threshold was met. Going back to the management-oriented side, the stop line graphic, just to remind everybody, the colors aren't just pretty colors. They actually have an actual narrative associated with them that are meant to guide this group in terms of what needs to be done based on the outcomes in any given year. So green is obviously doing good, stay the course, continue doing projects, report data as you've been doing, we're all good. Yellow is caution, review the data, understand whether or not the load allocations are met, begin discussions through our management conference with the TAC, kind of like what we're doing now. And then on alert is, things are not good. And that's when we really need to batten down the hatches and think about plans to remediate these conditions. And that's kind of been the scenario with Old Tampa Bay over the last couple of years. But speaking of Old Tampa Bay, this is kind of the good news. In 2022, it actually met the targets for chlorophyll and light attenuation and was given a category of green. This is the first time, I think, in 7 years that Old Tampa Bay has achieved the targets for water quality. So that's the good news. But that does kind of come with some caveats that I'll explain in a second. But this is the outcome matrix that is on the report card that kind of shows the long-term trend. This is the Old Tampa Bay column. So since 2015, it was given that caution category. And obviously this is not news to you all. We focus on this area in terms of understanding what's causing these changes and what we can do as a community to address them.
But again, 2022, all segments are green. That doesn't mean we can give up. We have some thoughts about that, but at least for 2022, the first start of our RA period, the first year of our RA period, we're doing good. In terms of the regulatory outcomes, kind of a similar story. And again, this matrix kind of just shows whether or not the chlorophyll threshold was met, so red, green only. And this is something that NMC really cares about. Like there's actual plan, a plan of action, NMC action plans for if a particular base segment doesn't meet the threshold for a year or 2 or 3 years. And so the 2022 threshold being met will probably come with, that'll be a good thing for them to hear. But again, we can't say it's fixed. I think there's some issues ongoing there that we still need to think about. I also want to report the chlorophyll trends. This is one of the graphics on the 2-pager. So this shows basically just annual averages of chlorophyll over time and how they relate to our management target and thresholds. Obviously, this is the long-term decline that we've seen the bay recovering over time. What's interesting is that, this is Old Tampa Bay. If you look at the last 6-7 years, it's been above the threshold, but 2022, much lower than it's been historically. So not sure why that is. Could be the sampling didn't coincide with peak bloom events. Not really sure about that, but it was much lower. And then the light attenuation trends. So the outcome, the red, yellow, green, is based on both chlorophyll and light attenuation. So things that are needed for seagrass growth. These are the trends there. Basically, everything was above board. But if you look at recent trends for Old Tampa Bay and Lower Tampa Bay, actually, they are trending in a direction that is not great. This has been kind of the slow increase in light attenuation in Old Tampa Bay. That's something we want to keep an eye on. It's going more and more closer to exceeding that target. Lower Tampa Bay actually wasn't great in terms of light attenuation as well in 2022. And I think, there's just been reports of people out in the field saying, the water quality in Old Tampa Bay or Lower Tampa Bay is, it's really murky. And I think the data actually kind of reflect this, looking at the values being quite high in 2022. And then by season, I also just wanted to point out, we like to highlight sort of key events each year when we release a report card. This shows a breakdown of the segments and sort of the long-term seasonal or monthly distributions of chlorophyll values. And so the red points are the 2022 values, and then the box plots and the jittered points are all other years going back to the 70s. And it is interesting to note that in 2022, we actually did have red tide come into Lower Tampa Bay. That is seen by the elevated concentration value in November. But fortunately, it was nothing like 2021. It was kind of short-lived and ephemeral. But we do like to point these events out so people are aware of some of the key events that have occurred within any given year. All right, so I do want to talk a little bit about the 2022 water quality results, specifically as it relates to Old Tampa Bay. I kind of alluded to these ongoing issues that I think we're all aware about, but I just want to put them in a more specific context. So as I said, these outcomes, the red, yellow, green values are based on both chlorophyll and light attenuation. And there's targets and thresholds that we think each bay segment should meet in order for the habitats to support seagrass growth. That's been our paradigm, our management paradigm for a long time, pretty much ever since the program has existed. Anytime a bay segment tends to go to yellow or green category, it's usually associated with eutrophic conditions. There's algae blooms, can be just sort of run-of-the-mill diatoms, or it can be caused by harmful algal blooms like pyrididium or red tide. We know that in Old Tampa Bay, it's been the pyrididium blooms since about 2008 that have caused that bay segment to, have a yellow or a red outcome. And just because it was green in 2022, I don't want us to just sort of say, we're doing great, because if we look at pyrididium, again, this is the HAB that has been causing those exceedances typically in Old Tampa Bay. This is looking at kind of a time series. This is from FWC data of the HAB concentrations in Old Tampa Bay as a function of season and location. So a lot going on here, but this is kind of a graphic I stole from Carrie Lopez. She's presented pyridinium data like this in the past, but you've got latitude in the y-axis here. So you kind of see spatially where these blooms typically occur each year. These dotted lines are the approximate location of each bridge in Old Tampa Bay. So bottom line is Gandy, middle is Howard Franklin, top is Courtney Campbell. So the blooms typically are in between Howard Franklin and Courtney Campbell, sometimes above, sometimes below, but typically right in between those two. And then the x-axis is day of year. So these blooms are typically late summer, early fall. That's the standard pattern we see. The points are sized by cell concentration and colored by bloom intensity as defined by FWC. So low, medium, high. And that's actually a log scale. So high is like on the order of 1 million cells per liter. Yellow means it was found, but there wasn't, a bloom identified as described by FWC. And then the gray cells they actually went out sampling, but they didn't find any pyridinium. So you can see the temporal evolution there. What's interesting about 2022 is it looks a lot like the other years. It might, it's a little bit lower, less sort of intense colors, smaller points than say 2021, but pyridinium is still there. So that is, the primary thorn in our sides in terms of what's causing these water quality issues in Old Tampa Bay. And not entirely sure why Old Tampa Bay got a green this year, but pyridinium is still there, still a concern to us. We did actually have some high bloom levels as well. There's some, dark purple up there in late summer. I also want to show you essentially a different way of looking at those data. So this is the same pyridinium cell counts as the previous slide, but shown broken down by each year and attributing each management outcome in the matrix to a given year. So that gray or that black line is the long-term average. The points are the individual concentrations, these small points. And then the large points are deviation from the long-term average for any given year in terms of the average. So grand mean and yearly average. And as I said, the colors correspond to the assignment for Old Tampa Bay for the management outcome. And these lines are the bloom thresholds. And so this is the log scale, keep that in mind. Here's 2022. Overall, it looks like the average pyridinium cell concentration was lower than the preceding years that were assigned that caution category, the yellow category. But there are other years when the average pyridinium concentrations were, lower than 2022, but it still got a yellow outcome. So again, kind of making the point that pyridinium is there, maybe a little bit lower in 2022, but this kind of gives a broader context in terms of understanding what's driving these changes. All right, so a couple take-home points. The word we like to use with this 2022 result is cautiously optimistic for Old Tampa Bay. We're hoping that this is the start of a longer trend for improved water quality, but we all know that water quality is variable. Sampling may or may not pick up key HAB events or key eutrophic events. So we're kind of holding our breath in a way to see if it gets better in the next couple of years. Seagrass is obviously an issue. We're still sort of sticking to our mantra of continuing load reduction efforts. That's been our tag for many, many years. We're not giving up on that as our key approach, but there could be other things to look into in terms of what's driving these seagrass changes. We have seen regional losses over the last couple of years that aren't specific to Tampa Bay, but there could be, locationally specific issues in Tampa Bay that we can address, maybe stormwater improvements in the Old Tampa Bay watershed as one approach. But there's research, there's management actions that need to be pursued to maybe understand and mitigate these issues. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Carrie, who'll talk about some of the other indicators for 2022, but I guess I'll pause for a second and see if you guys have any questions.
All right, so we're going to switch gears a little bit here, and the indicators that I'm going to go over are some faunal indicators within the estuary, and also a new kind of indicator scheme that we put together looking at habitat restoration goals. So the first one that I'll go over is a relatively new index. It was developed in 2018, and it's based on Nekton, which is a fancy word for fish and macroinvertebrates. And this is based on the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission's fisheries independent monitoring data. And it's based specifically on the smaller nets that they pull. So these are really small resident fish and macroinvertebrates and juveniles of recreationally important sport fish. So they're highly associated with the habitats within the bay. So, you know, this index is basically reporting on the health of those fish and invertebrates that are associated with those habitats. So this index can respond to water quality and habitat degradation because of that. You'll see that there's not as long of a time series here because that sampling only started monthly in 1998. So we don't have that longer track record that we do for water quality, but you can see that a lot of the trends match up with what Mark has already presented. The other thing to note on the faunal results is that these data are only through 2021 because it takes a lot more processing time, you know, to kind of put these indices together. So you'll see on the Nekton results that the 2021 results show all but lower Tampa Bay in that intermediate caution stage. So it's the first time since it looks like 2009 where we've had more than 2 bay segments with that caution stoplight color. You'll notice there's also no red on this report card. The index that is put together is based on species richness, you know, number of taxa, total taxa, number of benthic taxa, number of taxa that are recreationally important, and then also different trophic guilds. But the baseline that it's standardized on is based on the period of record. So we don't have all the way back to, you know, 1982. Yellow is actually a warning sign for this index. And you can see this a little bit better on graphical representation. So this is the index over time by bay segment. And you'll notice that there's only really one other time where there's a lot of these bay segments that get into the caution category, and that's in 2005. And if you were around in the bay in 2005, you know that there was a major red tide event during that year. And, you know, the resilience to this event was pretty apparent. You know, there was a decline in that year, and then it recovered relatively quickly. There were some fish taxa that didn't do quite as well, but it did recover. And then if you look to, you know, 2018, you'll see a little dip here in the index as well in lower Tampa Bay and middle Tampa Bay. And there was some red tide that was in the bay system in 2018 as well, not as significant as it was south of us, but there was some there. And then if you'll remember in 2021, that's when the Piney Point discharges occurred. And also we had a red tide throughout the bay in that time frame. So again, this is 2021. We're not sure what 2022 looks like, but we'll see if the fish and macroinvertebrates are as resilient as they have been in the past. You know, if we have these, you know, red tide events one on top of the other, you know, that may change how the fish community responds. So again, this is another index that we really want to watch and make sure we're keeping track of. So one of the other faunal indexes that we look at is the benthic index, and this reports on aquatic organisms that are at or near the bay bottom, and this information is collected by EPC these organisms really do respond to pollutants that accumulate in the sediment. And if you look here, you can see that the 2021 results, again, only have through 2021 here, are similar to other years. And throughout the time of record, you'll see that Hillsborough Bay is consistently in that red category. And some of that may be due to contaminant levels in the sediment, along with the invertebrates that are collected. There's also a suite of contaminants that are tested in the sediment, and Hillsborough Bay does tend to have higher levels for the threshold and potential effect levels for these contaminants. So it could be that there's likely effects on the benthic invertebrate community there. So again, another thing that we'll have to keep an eye on. The good thing about these indices is that they do track well along with the water quality and seagrass indices. So, it's just a suite of tools that we have to look at the state of the bay over time. So I'm going to switch gears after this, and we're going to talk a little bit about habitat restoration. And this is something that we're working on that's a little new. We're trying to develop a similar type of report card for habitat restoration over time. But just to give you some results on where we're at as far as 2022 and reported projects. So each year we ask our partners to report back with us on the number of projects and the acres that are restored. And we've parsed that out amongst habitats in our habitat master plan, and have looked at, how this applies to the targets that we have in place as far as restoring habitat to 2030. So this graphic just shows you the number of projects on the left here, and in the middle it has the total number of acres and then total number of miles, if that's how it's reported. So you can see the majority of the projects and acreages are in uplands, non-coastal uplands. But we've got representation in these other habitats that we're looking to concentrate on restoring. And then total number of miles, we had quite a few oyster projects, so that's good as well. And this is an annual reporting thing. It's voluntary. Our partners give us this information. And so it's kind of a touchstone on, how we're doing over time, kind of like the Transect data that's done with seagrasses. So there's an annual way that we can track this. So this next slide just shows the last 3 years and how we've been doing these particular habitats. You can see that we've got less projects in 2022, and that can vary just depending on when these habitat restoration projects end. And, again, it's voluntary reporting. So, but it looks like, the proportion of habitats that we're restoring is relatively similar. And, this is a good way for us to track over time and on an annual basis on where we want to concentrate habitat restoration. So what about a report card? So we've got the water quality, we've got the seagrasses, we've got Necton, we've got benthic. So how do we want to, kind of get an idea of how we're doing over time on habitat restoration? The last few slides I show you were the annual, just kind of raw numbers that are reported to us. But we wanted to take another step and look at the land use land cover and see if we can see how we're doing annually, as well as if we're going to meet the trend for habitat restoration that we've set for ourselves in 2030. So these are the categories that we put together. And again, this is new. It just was presented in August by Marcus and Mike Wessel at the Habitat Restoration Consortium. And then we refined it a little bit and presented it at the December one. So we're definitely looking for your input on this and whether you feel like it's useful. So just as far as the color scheme for the dark green, that indicates that our target for restoration within a year was met. And then also that the target will be achieved on a trajectory towards 2030. So we want dark green. For yellow, the target is met for the particular year, but the recent trend suggests that the target might not be reached by 2030. So that's something to look out for. The light green, the target is not met in that particular year, but the trend suggests that it may be achieved by 2030. So we really want to keep our eye on the ball and make sure that we achieve that long-term target. So those are our two green colors. And then finally, red, the target wasn't met in that year, and it doesn't look like we're going to make it work for 2030 either. So this is what it looks like. And you'll notice that it's, we don't have this for every year. Again, it's based on the land use, land cover. So the subtidal habitats, which are the ones farthest to the left, the tidal flat seagrasses and oyster bars, are based off the same information that go into the seagrass maps. So that's every 2 years. And then for the intertidal habitats and the upland habitats, those are based off the land use, land cover, aerial photography, and GIS layers associated with that. So just on an overall basis, we want to just kind of look at the trends over time. And this does not include 2022. It's only through 2020, but we will be able to incorporate the subtitle part of that soon. And you'll see that we've got a red caution here for seagrasses. So that means the target's not met and trending below. And then when you go into the total intertidal, you can see that the target is not met or trending below. And a lot of that you can see is due to salt marshes here. You can see a lot of those years of record. It's in that red category. So that's a habitat that we may want to concentrate on. And then if you go over to the upland habitats, you can see some other trends as well. It looks like we need to kind of keep up the pressure on freshwater wetlands, make sure that we're concentrating on that. So this is just a basic overview. Again, this is kind of a draft product. But based on looking at this and what we know about the annual targets, we put a couple of priorities into place, and basically based on this report card, we want to focus on restoring seagrass, oysters, salt marsh habitats, and freshwater wetlands. The uplands are doing pretty good, so we want to protect and keep these habitats as they are. The mangroves are doing relatively well, and they are going to be expanding with climate change. So there could be some, salt marsh to mangrove convergence happening there as well. So these are just some tools that we can use to communicate with our partners on, how we can look at habitat restoration goals in the future. And if you have any suggestions on how we can improve that, we're definitely open to that. And that is all we have. So if you have any questions about any of the report cards or indicators that Marcus and I talked about, we're open to questions. Yeah. Yeah.
That's like, for the people who just quickly, I'll think, oh, the problem is. Actually, that.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And we actually internally were discussing this back and forth yesterday when we did a run through of this presentation and, thought about different ways to communicate this. The reason that we stuck with the lighter green for the target is not met in that year, but is on a trajectory to be achieved is because we really want to keep our eye on the prize on hitting those restoration goals in the future. But yeah, I mean.
Some of the other schemes, and we talked a little bit about not only flipping some of these colors, but changing them all together so that it's also more accessible for people with color blindness. But then maybe to reflect some of these. So we appreciate that comment. We understand that the Habitat Master Plan is pretty complex actually, and so we've been focused on working on ways to distill this information and break it down. And so if you're still not understanding what we're trying to put out there, you're not alone. Let us know. Because, if we don't understand it all together in this room, then certainly like regular folks, in their day-to-day aren't gonna understand it either. So like Harry said, this is a new thing and we're really open to that kind of feedback and more to help us make this understandable.
Even the color is just a more contrast.
Yeah.
It looks terrible on this.
Yeah.
It does.
I'll add too that, you might feel inundated with report cards at this point. We have a lot, but there's a reason for that. And each piece of each report card is a piece of the bigger puzzle of how we describe what the health of the bay is. But we are, sort of short to long-term goal is to develop a comprehensive report card for the bay as a whole that rolls all of these things up to a single value. We don't know what that would look like, and there's pros and cons of doing that, but other estuary programs around the country have similar tools for really synthesizing that information. But we always hold true to the value of like, if you want to dig deeper, you can. But we're realizing that we serve many masters, I guess, or many individuals that have different needs, understanding how health of the bay and digesting that information at different levels. So just look forward to that, I guess, the next 5 years.
I love dashboards, by the way. Have them at work for everything, so you're not gonna, I think they help tell the story in a very good way.
Yeah, and news there as well. I've been working on a Benthic dashboard. The Benthic report card is, I guess, the one that's received the least amount of attention in terms of all the indicators. With the EPC data, and Chris, you can talk more about this. There's so much information there about the contaminants and the sediments that I think we could do better as a program in elevating that information, making it more accessible to you all. We're describing that component of the bay and how it fits into the bigger pieces. So I'm working on that. So stay tuned. That should be more of a short-term thing.
Anything long, short of it, well, hopefully we can get work on some of these key things that we need to make progress on.
This is a different kind of question. When you build these dashboards,
We're an open source camp, so all of our stuff is free and open. We use R and the Shiny platform. If anybody wants to have their staff learn how to use R, I'd be more than happy to do a workshop or something. We've done that in the past. I see it as one of my goals of like spreading the cultish mentalities of open science. But we want, obviously as a program, we want to be transparent and have our methods be useful. And some of those things came up earlier. By using these tools, we think that's one vehicle to do that.
Any additional questions, discussion on this one?
Thank you.
Mike?
Just briefly, the last page that has a snapshot of the dashboard that we use to manage all of the projects that we have going on internally. There's quite a few of them, so we try to summarize this information so you can understand both the quantity of projects that we're managing and the amount of dollars that are coming in and out of the program. The links are clickable, and you all should have access to those Smartsheet reports, so you can drill down to the individual project level. If you're not familiar with Smartsheets or you haven't taken the time to do that, but you are interested, please feel free to give me a call. We can schedule a time and I can walk you through it so that you can answer questions you have about specific individual projects. More dashboards. The next meeting is May 12th. It will be in this room. Same thing.